Alright, Goose on the 13th here, let's mull over some of the unit changes from this recent update, huh? So starting from the top down, we have the Unicorn Gundam. We finally got some nerfs for this thing, and it wasn't really significant. But the NTD ability boost actually had the area and direction of the effect for disabling Psyche weapons adjusted, as well as the awakening ability boost being changed, so healing amount during skill activation is adjusted from 6,000 to 4,000, and damage to the unit's HP has been adjusted from 20% to 15%. Not a super crazy change, to be honest, and as a quick disclaimer, we are going to be demonstrating these all with no parts on them. Still, overall, the general concept is still there. And because they only changed the NCD duration and all that other shit, they really didn't change any of the boost effects for NCD, as well as not really changing any of the other damage or output that this has in its NCD or Awakening, for that matter. So really, it's just able to affect Psyche Mew for less time over a smaller area while also just getting hurt a little bit faster. Not really what we were hoping for, but it is kind of what we expected. It definitely was just going to be a slap on the wrist, you know. So in some situations, I guess, especially if you were hoping to really just be able to top off after taking minimal damage, it's not going to be as possible anymore. But honestly, you're still going to be doing the damage. That hasn't really been messed with. You're just going to die slightly faster, which honestly, because you're fighting a bunch of other unicorns, was already kind of happening, so it is what it is. But moving on to the Banshee, well, I don't have it. But at the same time, legit, the only thing that really changed on it was the NTD, similar to the Unicorn itself. So we will skip that overall when we get to the raids. Moving on to the Zeta Gundam then. So the Zeta Gundam got several things. Thruster was increased from 75 to 80. Maneuver is increased from 66 to 69. A lot of the rest of the buffs for the actual stats itself are for the level 2 and up, including melee boost from 32 to 35. Thruster output increase level 1 has been given. Reaction booster program level 2 has been given. Thruster output increase level 2, so on and so forth. Moving on to the main weapon, the rapid shooting boost has been increased for the beam saber, and the downswing for the long beam saber has been increased in terms of the boost itself. So for the Zeta Gundam beam saber, rapid shooting boost increase, I really couldn't tell you quite what that means overall. A lot of the other skills and stuff that have actually been put on this also don't really apply to the level 1. But if we go down further here, we also have some changes for the transformed version as well. So because of the extra thruster, the maneuver and all that, it actually does go a little bit faster. It also has the ram attack biosensor level 1, which means that it does do a little bit more damage when it's actually popped. Hurt me more. Oh god, oh no. So where it would normally do like a K or so, or maybe almost 3K on a raid, once it actually pops, which by the way, the threshold, especially on, I mean, both this and the HML, is dangerously low. But as you can see, it does go up a little bit more, and if you're talking raids, you're talking about 3K plus. The bigger thing to keep in mind, unfortunately, is that at this cost range, there are a lot of things that do have body buffers, so it's really going to depend on where you hit them. But in some cases, you're doing about 2 to 3K, upwards to maybe 4K if you're hitting something with like neutral or a weakness to you. Also depending, of course, on where in the body you actually make impact with yourself in the mobile armor form itself. The beam gun also has a higher stagger accumulation value, as well as having a bigger ASL ring here, which is pretty nice. A little bit easier to stun things as you're moving on in. And you can also do it while boosting in the high speed, in the mobile armor form itself. So overall, a good adjustment, and considering that we knew that they were going to be messing with the HML itself, it kind of just stands to reason that they would also grant some of that to the regular Zeta. The regular Zeta I don't think has really been adjusted or messed with too much as well, so that's a welcome adjustments, and hopefully we'll start seeing these a little bit more often outside of people who are just super used to running these things around. So the silver bullet, once again, I don't have it, but we can run down what it does have in terms of adjustments. So it's got more HP by 1000, and it also scales up from 21k to 22k. Live ammunition resist boost has been increased from 20 to 25, and that also scales. Same with this beam resistance. The thruster has been increased from 70 to 75. The level 1 unit skill backbinder cushioning level 1 has been increased to level 2, and then that goes on for level 2 unit skill getting the thruster output increased level 1, and the level 2 also gets the backbinder special cushioning level 1 being increased to level 3. Yeah, that's a good jump actually. Overall, for the rest of it, the main weapon gets a slight increase from 3050 to 3150. The power increase for all of these, by the way, is actually just for the level 2 itself, which I do find a little bit strange. I'm not really sure why they made an exception just for that, but not the one below. In fact, most of the buffs outside of the initial stat bumps are just for the level 2. So if you were hoping that it was just going to get a pretty considerable increase overall, unfortunately you are out of luck. Moving on then to something I wasn't quite expecting to have be adjusted. It is the Dryzen, although of course in this case we're talking about specifically the level 3 getting most of these adjustments, and again it's another one for the level boosted one. And of course, because they're starting from the level 3, the level 4 also benefits for most of these. So if we go down the list here... Oh wow, did I never get the Dryzen at this cost? You're gonna tell me that I got it at 700 and not 650. Brush. Yeah, that's what this game is telling me. Son of a bitch. Well, I guess then. So in general, it's also gotten more health, so it's at 19 from 19k to 21k. Thruster is increased from 65 to 70. The unit skill Force Injector 1 has been increased to level 2. Level 4 unit skill Thruster output increase level 1 has been given, which also means that its high speed movement has been increased by 5. Level 4 unit skill Enhanced Tackle level 4 has also been increased to level 5 for the level 4 version of the unit. Going down the weapons and sub-weapons, most of these start at level 3 and scale up to the level 4, so the Long Beam Tomahawk actually goes from 2600 to 2700. The power for the 3-barrel beam cannon has gone up from 330 to 350, and the level 3 power has been increased for the tri-blades from 1100 to 1200. So overall, not the worst. I don't know if that's really going to encourage people to play this more at that cost necessarily. But it is interesting to see them actually even try to bother with that kind of adjustment for a suit that honestly feels like it probably shouldn't have been boosted this much, but you know, once again, it is what it is. There's going to be plenty more suits that are probably going to be like that in the future as well. Moving on then to our next suit, skipping the Banshee, moving right on over to the Zeta Plus A1. So honestly, the Zeta Plus A1 being one of the more anticipated suits to actually get an adjustment here. Getting the Roselle Beam Rifle finally as a usable weapon, which also means that it gets access to the long beam saber sub-weapon of this gun. Definitely a pretty cool adjustment for this one, being able to have a little bit more coverage in terms of how it moves and does its damage, while also still having a base instant stun as well as a charge shot on that rifle. Moving down the actual stuff in terms of the stat adjustments here, it's actually gotten more health up to 19k. The level 1 unit skill Assault Booster level 1 has actually been moved up to level 2, as well as doing so for the other boosted suits as well. We also get Enhanced Tackle level 4 to level 5 for the level 2. In fact, most of these from here on out are only for the level 2 and up, including getting boosts for the Wing Special Cushioning, Enhanced Tackles, Reaction Booster Program, as well as Thruster Output Increase being given from the level 3 onward. In terms of the sub-weapons then, the level 2's power is increased from 682 to 700, and the shield HP has been increased across the board from 3500 to 4500. Which is definitely a welcome change in terms of extra health, and it of course scales up with the unit itself. Overall, probably one of the more significant changes that has been mentioned and even previewed, and I think it's definitely going to change the usage percentage of this suit. The A1 is something that has had a fair amount of, I guess, just raid stands that still liked it, but this gives it a little bit more of a justification in terms of just more viability, more reach and aggression in terms of its melee, and overall just a more satisfying kit for something that probably should have had this option to go in the first place from the second that the Roselle was actually introduced. One thing to keep in mind as well is that this version of the Beam Spear, or whatever you want to call it for the Beam Saber itself, actually only has one swing, which means more often than not you're either going to be doing some pretty long reaches or swipes just to try to hold people still, or honestly just hunting for that downswing after you try to get your initial downswing done. It does have enough radio time to be able to get in a couple hits depending on how you approach it. And overall, especially for the higher levels of this suit, because you have so much more leeway on the cushioning and whatnot, you should be able to do a decent amount of work without taking too much damage. If we look at the things that are relevant to the transformed version of this suit, the unit HP has been increased, as well as the level 3 getting this special cushioning has been noted. I kinda do wish that some of this would be more relevant for the level 1 version of this, just because 600 does have a decent amount of raids for it to be competing with, but you know what? They've already done other adjustments to this suit, and at the end of the day, something is a little bit better than nothing, especially when it means a whole other weapon inclusion. So, we'll see what happens in the future of this suit, but for right now, this is a pretty welcome change, and we'll see how this develops in terms of its cost range as we get further on into the weekend. And moving on to our final raid adjustment, we are talking about the Bullenok Saman here. Overall, it has gotten a decent amount of stat boosts. Of course, once again, most of them have been smaller things. Assault Booster getting put up and bumped up across the board for each level version, starting actually with level 1 just going up to level 2. Force Injector level 1 has been increased to level 2 as well. Precision Analysis System has also been given, and that is because it's also gotten a sensor unit where it can actually spot and scramble stuff as well. And of course, you know, it's gotten more health. But one thing to keep in mind about the sensor unit itself is that the heat rate is 100, it pulses 3 times, and the range is actually only 250. So, not having gotten the AWAC Jagan myself, I'm not very sure whether or not it actually behaves similarly in that regard. Obviously, the Isaac has a much bigger range and it only pulses once per use. And I'm assuming it probably also has a longer spotting duration, if not only slightly. But of course, everything else about this suit hasn't really been changed, which is kind of okay and also not, because we also still have the issue of it not having a certain skill, which is Anti-Blast Stabilizer. But considering how much raw damage this thing does and the fact that you're pretty much having to move on once you actually get your stuff, I think at this point not having that on you is just something that they want to have actively punish you for just committing to melee for too long, especially since now using the sensor you can pretty much scramble where you are, especially if you're in the middle of a good fight, and just kind of get in and out of situations while also repositioning yourself. The one thing that kind of irks me is that the combination of this having a really short range while also pulsing 3 times with an effect and a sound associated with it means that it's kind of obvious when you're doing it, and most people, especially if you're that close, are probably going to be able to hone in on where you are on the enemy team. So unless they're in the middle of a really big fight, they're going to be able to peel off pretty quickly and just start being on the lookout for you. And the second they spot you, it's probably going to start getting a little bit messy. You're going to have to try to raise up your aggression. But look at some of the raw damage, even with this just not having anything on it. Like, it's pretty ridiculous. Putting on extra melee and stuff was making this downswing supports on this map for like 8k. It's still doing 7 even without that. You're able to just sit through those. Most of the swings on these are multi-hit because it's dual wielding for both of its melee. The stun threshold has been adjusted in the past for the missiles, so it's actually really nice, as well as the fact that you at least had the rifle to help do some build-up or maybe charge it in time to get a quick stun before you start moving in for the kill. And the hitbox, as you can see, for the downswings is pretty forgiving. You definitely have a fair amount of leeway in this suit, but of course, once again, keep in mind that if you come in and don't leave right away, you are going to get stunned by those body explosions. You definitely have to try to keep on the move, so thank goodness that they at least gave us a little bit more maneuverability on this thing, especially when we're talking about the force injector being bumped up a little bit. Still, it's nice for them to keep messing with this. Apparently the sensor is something that's been a long time coming. I actually had forgotten about that after a while, because honestly there's been so many other adjustments and talk about this suit that it almost kind of seemed negligible. And to a certain degree, depending on how you feel about it, it might still be. But it's a nice option to have, especially in more hectic battles where you can kind of just scramble things up a little bit, hopefully use it to reposition without them just following the pings to where you are. But we'll see as time goes on how much it actually gets used, or if this is going to end up fading back into obscurity as a suit outside of 1 or 2 people who are like insane with it. Moving on then to our support round here, we are looking at the Zeta Gundam HML, which incidentally just so happens to have similar adjustments to it as the Zeta Gundam itself, although interestingly enough, not quite as extensive, which is kind of odd. So the unit features has its regular movement speed has been increased to 120, the thruster speed has actually been increased to 70, and the sub-weapon for the level 2 arm grenade launcher has actually been bumped up from 500 to 550. But the bigger thing is that of course it got the ram attack biosensor level 1, much like its general counterpart, as well as the sub-weapon beam gun having the usual higher accumulation, the ASL and all that, much like the general as well. Overall, just makes it slightly more flexible, although the bigger thing here is that even with that, the transform flight is still pretty, I guess, just vulnerable. The bigger thing for the ram attack biosensor on this one is also that the high speed movement is pretty quick, as well as the fact that you just get a good bump up on that boop. But I don't know if you really should be that aggressive with trying to make impacts with things in a support suit like this. Not to say that people won't try it, not to say that it won't work out for people in the end, especially if they're still just, you know, trying to get their final bits of damage or whatever, because the biosensor threshold is pretty low. You're gonna be pretty hurt by the time it happens, so it all just sort of depends on the situation. But still, do I think it's gonna mean that people are gonna try to unshelf this suit? Not necessarily. Though the people who are already playing this will definitely thrive from it a little bit, and overall it'll probably remain at the same general usage rate, which honestly at this point is probably for the best. And moving on, we have another support here with the White Rider getting some adjustments as well. Overall, the HP has been bumped up by 1,000 and scaling up from there from 16,000 to 17,000. The beam resistance has been bumped up to 22, the melee resistance being bumped up to 23, the thruster has been increased to 60, and the unit skill special back add-on buffer level 1 has been increased to level 2. The only other adjustment being that its main gun, the Shekinah's Gatling gun, has actually been increased in terms of range from 275 to a flat 300. Which honestly, considering that they only left an increment of 25 in between that probably should have been that way from the start. Kind of overdue for something that shouldn't have even been, you know, outside of the realm of possibility. Still, it is interesting to see this actually get touched on after a hot second, although to be honest, considering that I think they've already adjusted a couple other things in the past, and the fact that this is just some flat stat increases as well as maybe some slight extra bits of survivability depending on where you hit it, it still kind of just suffers from being a support. So, I don't know. People who have already been running it, once again, this seems like one of those updates where if you're already running it, then this is only going to help you further, but I don't think it's going to change people's minds on trying to run this suit. But having that 300 range does feel pretty good for the actual Gatling itself, so that the one thing that you're probably going to be doing in between all of your other shots does feel a little bit more hefty in terms of how much you can duck it down while strafing or trying to lead people back to other units. Everything else about this is pretty much the same, although of course you're probably not going to be charging for the long haul on that. And generally just cycling between your other weapons, not to mention the fact that you have balancers so that you can still get those stabs in there on occasion, although all things considered, that damage, not super crazy. Not the craziest thing you're going to be doing with this suit. Still, if it's something that feels, you know, maneuver-wise a bit more comfortable for you, then maybe having that extra bit of range will actually help you out, and hopefully the buffers will actually come in handy too. And moving on to our final unit adjustment here, we had the Yagdoga QA. Support version here has gotten the usual treatments of getting a little bit of extra health, which bumps it up to 23,000. The unit skill damage control level 1 has been given, and level 2 unit thruster has increased from 65 to 70. Once again, for whatever reason they deemed it necessary for the level 2 and not the level 1, even though honestly, outside of whatever usage it has a level 1, it probably could use all the same adjustments that this is giving specifically to level 2. Because as we move down to the sub-weapon, the overheat has been reduced from 25 to 22 for the Mega Particle Cannon, the focus has been reduced to 5.5, but once again, only the level 2's version has its power increased to 1500 flat. Similarly, the funnel's pincer has the level 2 power boosted to 350, the lock-on firing distance for both has been increased, which is good because it's a fucking support. And then going to the surround funnels, the level 2's power specifically has been up to 450 with no other adjustments. Overall, once again, it's nice that they touched on this suit, but I wouldn't really say that those are any of the adjustments that it needed. Honestly, I wouldn't have minded them also just giving that shield buffer, much like the G has. Not to mention we have other things that could have been a little bit better, like them adjusting the main gun again so you don't have to use a whole other suit's MG in its stead to stand a little bit more of a chance in terms of accumulation. Not to mention having the variable charge. So yeah, honestly, even if they were to give that extra thruster to the level 1 version, again, wouldn't be enough. I feel like at this point they're being a little bit too rigid in terms of what they want support suits to be, and they need to make them a little bit more flexible. If that means making them essentially yellow generals, then by all means, because we already have pseudo raids and pseudo supports in the general line anyway, so why the hell not just extend that to the one class that's definitely struggling in this game right now. So yeah, overall, at least they tried to touch on it, but the things that they think need help are definitely not spot on, and it's starting to get pretty frustrating. So that is the adjustments for the suits as of this current update. Overall, the support ones were pretty underwhelming. The Unicorn and Banshee nerfs were also just pretty much wrist slaps, although some of the other adjustments to other raids and units were pretty nice and things that are overall just welcomed. Hopefully we see some other unit adjustments next month, maybe some things that are a bit more significant, and also I do hope that they continue this trend of giving more units different weapons and things to use. There's definitely a lot of other use cases in terms of maybe making the beam javelin more available at certain cost ranges and other weapons as well. But that is all for now, so until next time, this is Goose Under 13th. I will talk to you all later.